Well, good afternoon. Today at Canucks This Week, we have published author Patrick Johnston, our Canucks beat writer. We'll get into his book about Gino Odjick later on. Patrick had a very successful book launch yesterday. Nice to see a lot of the big faces in sports media, heavy hitters. Even Matt Sakaris put down his knife and fork and showed up to the event. It was nice to see.
And Snail, yeah, I mean, if
Yeah,
you
Stan
direct
Smeal, Farhan
people,
Lalji, Jeff JPat, not flat JPat, three-dimensional JPat.
yeah, rough give or take. I mean, I was telling you, it's give or take the 10th anniversary of the launching of the podcast.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we'll talk a bit more about your book later. I wanted to start as usual with the Canucks, and this team both can bore me and fascinate me because and I know we keep talking about this every week.
Right.
We're at this US Thanksgiving mark pretty much next
Yeah.
week where teams are what they are. The margins are slim.
Yeah.
This team's dealt with a ton of injuries. They're certainly not so far out of it that you think the season's over already.
Right.
But it's almost like they play up to good teams and they might get the loser point, but they don't quite succeed, and then they play down to bad teams and
Sure.
and so a lot of the games are very similar, but they're showing a grit and a fight back.
Yeah.
Um, that I think we have to admire a little bit, and that leads you to believe that whether, regardless of what people think of Adam Foote, is that he has this team at least in the right headspace. Maybe they're not getting the results, maybe they're not talented enough,
Yeah.
but they're showing a lot of the right stuff that should keep you interested, right? Do you agree?
Yeah, on the whole, yeah. I mean, yeah, let's remember at the same time, for all the vibes, maybe they're still seventh in the division. I hate to kind of be the negative Nelly here, but
No,
they
that's
are
fair.
they're score the reason why they have been fun a lot of the time is because they're scoring goals. The problem, of course, is they're giving up too many goals. They're doing the most in the league. They scored the sixth most in the NHL. Like that, the games are not boring from sort of emotional stakes perspective. Um, I think you're right. Like the sort of it is an interesting team to be around. There's not the sort of persistent sourness we kept running into last year for all the obvious reasons. Um, there's still the element of, I mean, as I wrote last week, like Quinn Hughes, you could see it at times, and I think he talked a little bit about this yesterday with Ian McIntyre, but like, there are things about the season that are inevitably going to be frustrating, and the truth of this team's stance. And Adam Foote talked to me about this yesterday, and I wrote a bit about it with him and with Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson and how well they're both playing. It's a team that has a couple things going on, which is, first of all, the top players are playing well. Like the Canucks are doing well when Pettersson and Hughes and Phil Pronik also are on the ice, and Thatcher Demko, before he got hurt, playing pretty well. Like they were getting big contributions from big players. The problem is that those, I mean, other than the goalie, those guys can't play the whole game, and so there is an aspect of this team being a young team, patching some holes a little bit. Obviously, there's no real second line center, and sort of this hope and belief that Foote was talking about, that you're trying to take some take some hits now for long term benefit. And a bit of a belief, especially if you look at, say, some of the they are running out two rookie defensemen, right? Like Elias Pettersson Jr. And Tom Verlander, who I think has been really quite good since not a great first game, are being given an opportunity to make mistakes. And Adam Foote talked a bit about this like yesterday. That listen, like there's a lot of things these guys got to learn, but we got to do it. And so that's sort of the other half of it, and which is why, I think in the big picture, why people are going to sit back and say, what is Quinn Hughes' future here? Is he on board with, helping to sort of create this new dawn that the Canucks management team hopes for, that's coming in a season or two? Or is he just being like, listen, I've had enough of this, yada yada, I'm going to go somewhere else? That is why we're going to keep talking about it, because it's an impossible thing to ignore. But like, listen, like it's I've sort of lost my way a little bit in my answer, but this is a team that has things going for it and doesn't have things going for it. None of the things that aren't going for it are that surprising. We knew they had sort of issues with center depth, and we thought they would be better defensively than they've been, but I suppose this is, I guess, credit to Adam Foote. This is his acceptance of reality, is that this is a team that has to play for the future and has to do some sort of self-vetting while management tries to find a way to get a second-line center. And, it's not, they're going to have to do something. I mean, Jim Rutherford talked about this last week in that he said, well, we don't want to trade any prospects. We're not going to do a rebuild, but we're going to try to play a young team. So and as I wrote about, let's stop talking about the word rebuild. Let's just talk about building a team. Like, how do you actually do that? And that's what they're in the middle of right now. So, the fact that it's sort of entertaining hockey at least, and as you said, like, the vibe is pretty decent. These guys, I go in that room, I had a great chat with Jiri Patera, who's the backup goalie for now. We'll see how long he actually is. Really nice guy, and has had a great story. He's not going to be a big player in all this, but a nice little story of his own. And we looked across the room, and there's Linus Karlsson and Max Sasson, who are the fourth liners. As I've been calling them, the Calder Cup line. Obviously, Arshdeep Bains has been sent back to the minors, but those guys are there, and they're sitting there, and they're smiling, and every day, almost every day, I have some kind of generous exchange with Sasson, because he's just a good guy. And, Elias Pettersson I talked to today, just sort of about the nuts and bolts of what do you do when you're getting ready for face-off. Like, there are good things in this team. Kiefer Sherwood, who just is he's such an energetic player, but on the ice is sort of such a calm, collected, and sort of reasonable guy. And Drew O'Connor, kind of similar. There's lots of good little things here. I talked to Elias Pettersson yesterday, who's, I think, playing with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, and good for him. That's what this team needs, and he's playing, as I would say, as well as he ever has, and this is what they need, obviously, from him every day. So, there's the vibes are good, but the truth still remains, as I said off the top, that this is a team that's near the bottom of the division. They need to pick up the pace if they're going to make the playoffs, because, as you said, this is such a crucial point in the season, and there's just a history there you can't avoid.
Yeah, the points definitely, and there is a long way to go, but yeah, maybe they get some of their injured players back. That helps a little bit.
Yeah.
But this interminable conversation we have about whether the team is going to rebuild or not.
Yeah.
We've seen over the decades that the Canucks have been in most people's hearts in this city, in this province, that, there have been some very, very bad teams, like teams completely bereft of talent. It's more of a summer project to go through the Jason Herders and Dan Woodleys of the top 15, top 10 draft picks that just never panned out. When you look at how you would build a winning team,
right?
You wrote a piece yesterday about Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson, and when they're on the ice, what that means to the Canucks, and what it means, more importantly, when they're not.
Right.
And while yes, you look at their spot in the standings and it can be very doom and gloom. Calgary don't have a Pettersson and a Hughes.
No.
They have a couple of foundational pieces that are very difficult to acquire. And Pettersson's not scoring at the rate that we thought he would be, maybe 2-3 years ago, that he would continue on that trajectory. But this year is a lot better than last year overall. Talk about these two players. I mean, sometimes it's so easy to just get lost in the malaise of the Vancouver Canucks and forget that they've got two very, very good players. And if you can find a way to fill in those holes around them, I'm not going to say that's easy, but it's not as hard as going, we don't have a franchise defenseman. How do we get one?
Well, that's absolutely the case. You're absolutely right. Like they're still in a good spot. Like that. As long as they've got Quinn Hughes, they're in a decent spot. Like they have, you're such a soccer guy. We talk about the spine of the team in soccer, right? Like the spine of the team is there, especially if Pettersson is well and truly back. Like this is a guy that is playing like a number one center. Now he's not. You're still wanting him to score more, but he's scoring at a point per game pace. He's taking big face-offs. He's playing well defensively. I mean, he's always played well defensively. He is back to his aggressive puck-carrying self in the offensive zone. The puck is now bouncing for him. I mean, he would probably we didn't have an argument. I talked to him yesterday, and he sort of pushed back, like, well, like all you guys ever talked about was scoring points, and I said, well, no, that's not true. I said, overall, you're just playing well, like, but I suppose his counterpoint was like, listen, I just wasn't getting any luck. I wasn't having any luck, and now he's getting it, and he should be. It's the old, you got to be good to be lucky, and lucky to be good, so on and so on. He certainly wasn't doing enough to create his own luck, and now he is, I think, although he still needs to shoot more. It is a team that does have some good foundational elements. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And even if the Demko thing is interesting because there is an case out there that I have some time for, that we overrate the importance of goalies, that fundamentally the overall quality of your team is what matters. I mean, look at the Edmonton Oilers. They made it to the Stanley Cup final 2 years in a row with Stuart Skinner as their number one. Now, did they lose because Stuart Skinner was their number one? There's also a case to be made that then maybe in that case the goalie does matter. Certainly you can, our friend in Toronto, Steve Simmons, who I do a video with every week, would argue that Sergei Bobrovsky, all that matters is that he has been a great playoff goalie. And that's not hard to argue against. That in the end, what we do know is you need big performance of your goalie. Whether you can predict who it's going to come from is a different question. Anyway, the point is that this is a team that has a lot going for it. That said, the whole remains, and I've already talked about it. Like, as long as Filippino's out, and I don't think we don't know. They say he's been doing better, but he's clearly not skating, clearly not doing anything any exercise. So you have to start moving forward, saying, okay, who is going to be the second line center? Canucks need to solve that problem, and no matter what, especially if they really do want to try to make the playoffs this year, that is a hole they have to fix. And we certainly know that Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford especially have been always trying to get ahead of the market, find players out there. So how do you go get, I don't know, Nazem Kadri or a player like that? It's going to be difficult. You're going to have to move somebody. And so you start wondering, well, who could they move? And especially if they don't want to move any prospects. And there's a guy like Connor Garland, I think maybe might be an interesting player. It's a team that has things, but they need more, and they've got it. The way forward, which seems to be implied by Jim Rutherford last week, is that they need to basically change the cards they have in their hand. There's not a lot of avenues to making that change, but they clearly seem to know they need to do it.
No, and it's a tough question, as you said, because how do you get better? I mean,
yeah,
I've just mentioned Kiefer Sherwood because he's a free agent and his price is clearly going up, but he's meant so much to this team. But with how much he's meant, they're still not in a playoff position. So strikes me as being an absolute playoff peach for someone with his energy, his physicality, and the fact that he's chipping in those goals as well. Just to go back to your story on Pettersson and Hughes, this is where I find the Hughes conversation about the sort of medium to long-term future so fascinating about how this team manages this. Is there a fear, like when you look at the numbers, when they're 5-on-5 and those two are on the ice, they get 51.3% of the shots you reported today. But in the time when they're not on the ice, they've got 44% of the total shot attempts. So it just really shows what zone they're playing in when those guys aren't out there. Is there a danger? We've talked a lot about the schedule. This is a nice anomaly for them here, playing Dallas on Thursday, only game within 5 days. The NHL prides itself on toughness and sitting out. Is there a danger of overplaying both these guys, especially since we've seen Hughes? I mean, they're chasing, right? And you can't, if you start holding back, when is it too late? But how do you think Adam Foote can manage the situation? Should he maybe turn it up and play them more, considering those numbers are so stark? Or do you have to worry about how they're going to be after Christmas, etc.? Along with the Olympics looming, too. That's the other elephant in the room.
I mean, part of the challenge, I think, truly has been that they've been on the road so much. They've done a lot of travel so far this season. And that's just a situation where you can't pick your spots as well. But when you're at home, you can pick your spots and you can think carefully about the kinds of matchups you want. So, is there a way to actually get more out of them by playing them less? Possibly, just if you're trying to optimize the shifts. And this is something I would say, one of the things that in the early season I said when we first sort of looked at sort of how the shift rotations were happening, there were a couple of games there. I mean, Adam Foote was a bit defensive about it, but Elias Pettersson didn't play a lot, and you're in games and you're trying to win games. He did have one night, and I can't remember who they were playing, but the game was lost, and he said, "I'm not." I think it was in Pittsburgh, and he barely played Pettersson down the stretch. He said, like this is a game in the future that like we don't want to burn him out here, and we need to save him for the next game. So. They have thought carefully in those terms, and I think Foote has gotten a little bit more strategic and a little more like smart in how he's handled certainly Pettersson's ice time. Hughes is just playing a ton. I mean, we know Hughes was dealing with some kind of aches and pains. I think we suspect it was his groin. He's a guy that eats minutes. He loves it. He's going to go hard. He's going to play as much as he can. He perhaps is a bit more of a worry. I mean, Pettersson obviously missed time, and he suggested he was dealing with knee tendonitis, and certainly a week or two ago when he still wasn't scoring, playing well enough, but still not scoring, not accelerating for people. There was sort of this notion that we could say that like maybe the knee thing was a little more serious than anybody had ever really truly acknowledged. I'm not so convinced of that now. I think he's fundamentally playing the way I thought he would play and making a difference. So, is there a worry there because there is past sort of a knee sort of wear and tear kind of issue? I don't know. But certainly Hughes, we can just see recently, and even last spring, ran into some sort of structure, physiology challenges. But he's already playing a ton. So I don't know how much more you can actually truly play him. I've advocated for this before, and I understand perhaps why they've been a little hesitant to do it, but I do think this is, for instance, a great example of why Filip Hronek would be a great, as a guy maybe you got to lean on a little bit more, separate the two of them and have one on the ice, have them basically split the game. And that way one's always on there controlling the game. And Filip Hronek has a really mature season. Adam Foote was asked about him this morning on Thursday, and Foote talked a lot about sort of he's seen a lot of growth even in the last sort of 6 months since he got hurt last season. But pointing out that this is a guy that he's been with since basically the beginning in Vancouver, and the amount that he's added to his game, and he doesn't talk a lot with us in the media, and that's by his own choice, and I suppose fair enough. But he is a locker room leader. He's a guy that is vocal and is known to his teammates. His teammates will let you know that he makes a big difference for us in terms of accountability and teaching and all these things that the veteran leaders on this Canucks team need to be doing. Listen, I can see a way where they actually lean more on Hronek to help the Hughes situation, but then you become in a question: can you afford to lean on two guys that much, given the length of the season? Given to make the playoffs
with the Olympics. Not just a compressed schedule, but we know they've got their best players going to be involved in the Olympics. It's just such a shame that they're like so far out of the playoff mix at the moment. As I said, you're chasing,
right?
That you can't manage that a little better, because when to go back to the goalie conversation, if Thatcher Demko's healthy in the playoffs, 2 or 3 big saves in a game, and all of a sudden you're up in the series, and it can just make such a difference at that part of the season. So,
exactly.
There's a long way to go yet, even though we talk about this small post and where they are. Everyone did their, hey, we're 25% through the season, let's give the Canucks a grade. Like, everyone does that now, right? So generally people are pretty disappointed in how the season's gone. But, I think that if you look at how the team is structured, and we've been talking about center all year, and yes, there's work for obviously for Jim Rutherford to do. I don't know how he's going to do it, because prospects, draft picks, I don't see another way to solve that problem. You're picking up a David Kampf, Lucas Reichel, bargain bin is, you have to be, you talk about lucky, you have to be incredibly lucky to hit on the bargain bin. So, well, I don't know what you see as it. There's been some good stuff in our prospect stuff. Steve Young does a weekly power rankings for prospects, and I also saw Craig Button did. The Canucks are generally ranked very low in terms of their overall prospects, but their top end prospects, they call TSN. Craig Button calls them the core 4. There's some real thought about how Braden Coots fits in, and about, obviously Vilander. Lecky or Mackey maybe is the one piece you could sacrifice. But I don't know. It's that Quinn Hughes thing, right? If he's here for the long haul till Coots comes along, you can see a path.
Yeah.
But if like this time next year, it's like, no, it's not happening. I'm not going to stay here. You can't get him to sign an extension. Then your hand's forced, right? So I don't know when you think that a move could be made. We've talked before about Rutherford being more aggressive and not waiting until the deadline, but this team is so in the middle of everything. You can make an argument that they really are the glass half full, glass half empty team in the NHL.
Truly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they truly are. And the thing I come back to is the sort of philosophy that we've always seen from Rutherford and essentially Alvin, because he's learned from Rutherford. But the idea that you listen, it's true of all general managers, but these guys are so very much the sort of example of it, that you are always trying to build a new team, right? Like, you are always trying to make your team better. You're always looking for trades. You're always poking around the edges of the roster and seeing how, maybe can we make this better? Can we add a player that'll make us better? And, the best example of this was 23-24, the idea of adding Nikita Zadorov. And it was around this time, right? It was late November, if I'm not mistaken. And that was a defenseman that, it was a bit of a dart throw, but they were like, I think this will make our defense better. And he did end up in the long run. In the playoffs, he was fantastic. Let's not forget, he was
the best player in the playoffs.
But there's an example of the kind of move you made, not a lot of risk, and it may bring you marginal gains. So them poking around and constantly trying to do that kind of move. I mean, David Kampf is an example of that. He's not a great offensive player, but he gives you a little bit more defensively, a little more stability in the center ice role. In a job that, like, right now, Lucas Reichel has not been able to do the job. And it's similar kind of throw a dart. Here's a young guy. Maybe if we can give him some ice time, maybe he can figure it out. And they played him, and he just, in the end, beautiful skater. I enjoy watching him stick handle the puck, but he has really struggled to finish in the NHL. He struggled in Chicago. He struggled here. So the search will continue. There's no doubt about it. They knew going into the offseason that it wasn't just that maybe they had doubts about Phil Hedl. They just knew they needed more depth in center. And so now they are again looking for a centerman that they've been talking about months and months and months and months and months and months for. Now, I don't think they'll find a direct replacement for JT Miller. Side note, by the way, as I noted, I think recently, like, Miller's having a hard time in New York. That was a bullet that they put in the chamber themselves. They've dodged it. Like, they are not dealing with that. They have a very handy Marcus Pettersson on the roster. They have a team that is more sort of structured the way they want to do it, but now, of course, they've got to fill that center hole. And as we've already said a couple times, in the end, it's going to be a complicated one to fill. And how you do it, you're probably going to have to move off somebody you currently have.
It is curious, as you point out in your story, they're sixth in the NHL in goals scored, and they're worst in goals against. And
for the record, I believe they're seventh now.
Okay, but anyway. The last time that they scored less than 2 goals was when they got shut out by the Rangers pre-Halloween.
Right.
But then you look at what's happened, and I know there were some anomalies here. Like, they score 6 in Tampa, but they give up 8, including 5 in the third period against Florida. But, 8 against Florida, 5 against Winnipeg, 5 against Colorado, 5 against Chicago. Even in the games that they won, they give up 4 to Nashville and 3 to like, it's clear that has to be, and it's not all on the goalie. I mean, the Florida game made me laugh. Like, you look at the shots against and the fact they score 5 goals on 15 shots, and meanwhile, people look at it and go, "Oh, Demko's injured. That's 40 shots against," and you end up giving up 8. That's not good either. But you had the better save percentage and lost the game. It would suggest that picking up guys like Kampf maybe can work, at least to get them back over that line.
Yeah, I mean, listen. The other way to slice it, they've scored a lot of goals. At the same time, you do it per game, and they're like, I think they're 15th or 16th in the league, right? Like, there's a lot of sort of average about this team, and you can see why they know they need to do more. they need to shore up their defense, and that's a bit of a systems question. I mean, it is also fundamentally a quality of lineup question. Uh, their power play's been fine. Their penalty kill's been atrocious, right? Like I
Yeah,
wrote about
worse
this
than the league.
2 weeks ago, even they were and it's not going away. Like they've been losing the special teams race. If you want to look at one specific thing that they can actually probably solve pretty quickly, it's fix the penalty kill. Just get average. They're far and away the worst in the league. Just get something close to average, and you will all of a sudden start seeing this team at least punching its weight again. And they are not in these games because I mean the latest. I mean they're giving up a power play goal 1 out of every 3 attempts, and I think their power play is at 23 or 24%. So that's give or take 1 every 4 attempts. So they're scoring power play goals at a rate still less than the rate they're giving up goals against on the penalty kill. That's just not a sustainable way to play.
No, this isn't an assignment per se, but I haven't seen anything written on it from a trend point of view in the NHL. But it does seem like there's the maybe it's a compressed schedule, but you're seeing more 5-4 games than 3-2 games.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So the league is slowly being dragged to that way from a trend point of view. Okay, we've gone on quite a bit here, which has been good. But I did want you to talk about your book. Great stories told last night. The book, it's been out for a while, but Christmas is coming. And I do want to be clear. I mentioned it when I said Matt Sakaris put down his knife and fork to come. That wasn't a shot at him per se. It was because of the interminable debate that I remember of Matt eating pizza with a knife and fork.
Oh my goodness.
It was a pizza reference. I don't trust people who eat pizza with a knife and fork. I just think it's weird. And that's a hill he wanted to die on. So that was that reference. It was not a personal shot at Matt, other than I don't trust him because he uses a knife and fork to eat pizza. But anyway, lots of great stories. Peter Leech was...
Stories. Yeah, there's no pizza stories in this book.
Peter Leech was there, your co-author on the book. Gino's very good friend. Just maybe tell a couple of stories about the book, or why people should get it, what they'll find if they get it. Our editor Nikki Bennett said, would I like this book? And I said, yeah, I think so. It's not so much about hockey. I mean, it's about a hockey player, but it's about the person more than the player.
Yeah, and when Peter and I first approached me and had said, this had been something he and Gino had talked about before, and that I guess my name had come up along the way. I said to him, listen, like, if we're going to do this, I think we need to tell the full scope. And Peter agreed. And Peter's just, he's not he as I said, Peter's a wonderful storyteller. But, not a writer. I'm the writer. And, when I said to him, if we're going to do this, I want to make sure that we aren't afraid to talk about the nuances of his life. And his relationships and who he spent time with and how he was as a parent, and he did obviously have issues with alcohol in his youth and these sorts of things, but I thought these are important to tell a story because this is something that people care a lot about. And then we had a wonderful conversation with his sister Dina, who Peter's known for years, and Dina's one of Peter's biggest backers, given everything Peter did for her brother, especially over the last decade of his life. As she said to me, listen, like, Peter did everything for Gino. That when Gino was sick and looked like he was going to die in 2014, Peter was there who drove him to the hospital. Peter was the guy who spent all the time with him, and then in the decade after that, that Gino, as his health sort of went up and down. It was always Peter. There wasn't any, his family. There wasn't. She said, I'm as guilty of this as anyone. Like, I didn't go out to give him a break, and so this was for Peter, was a deeply personal thing. He wanted to tell the story of his friend, and raise him up, as both he and Dina have both said. And that there was a book that it covers all kinds of ground. Like, I read the reading I gave last night is the chapter 1. And I sort of partly chose it because Stan Smeel was in attendance, and Stan plays a big role in the story, in that part of the story, which is that there was a sign in January 1991, a fan in the crowd at the Pacific Coliseum holds up a sign and says, Gino's tougher than Saddam. And of course, the U.S. was set to bomb, and the U.S. and its allies were set to bomb Iraq, and so Saddam Hussein's in the middle of the news, and Gino nudges Stan Smeel and says, "Which one out there is Saddam?" and as if he's talking about one of the players, and just but then what? And it's sort of this story kind of got relayed off into the hockey reporting world as it happens, and sort of this notion of, well, what a country bumpkin, he doesn't know anything. And what Stan confirmed for me was that really, no, Gino knew. Gino had a huge grin on his face, Stan said. He said he could still remember the smile on his friend's face. And Gino was kind of playing a bit of, he liked to play the role a little bit, I think. Um, the other contender for all this was talking about how Gino, the other for the reading, I should say, was basically how Gino became a hockey player. Here he was in the fall of 1988, and he's not sure he's going to play hockey anymore. He's a teenager. His high school girlfriend is pregnant again, and so he's going to be a father again. And actually, there was another young lady he was intimate with, and she was also pregnant. And Gino wasn't sure what he was going to do. He thought, well, I guess I'm going to have to become a welder, or maybe I'll become a cop. He hadn't even signed up. He'd played midget hockey the year before, but he hadn't signed up for the season there. And was off in the bush hunting. And he had signed up for this welding course, so he'd have to move down to Ottawa. And his mom Giselle was concerned, and so she called up a old family friend of theirs, a man named Louis Branchot, whose son was playing junior hockey for the Hawkesbury Hawks. And she sort of said, well, you're down in, I think you go down, Ottawa, is there a men's league team that we can, he's going to need things to do that, he's going to be idle. He needs things to do. And he goes, well, why doesn't he go try out for my son Michel's team? And next, basically the rest is history. Gino shows up, and Bob Hartley, and this, this is, by the way, I in the end didn't end up talking to Bob, but the story has been relayed in pieces around in other reporting and other one of the sources for the book was Bob Marjanovic, the Moj, the longtime sports radio host here in Vancouver, his own podcast now. Moj interviewed Gino, and one of the things, Gino told a lot of this story. And basically Bob Hartley looks at this big kind of lumbering teenager and, I have enough defensemen who can sort of clear the front of the net or can make a pass. What I really need is I need some toughness to play up front, and you want to try. And Gino goes, sure. And Gino hadn't really been a fighter to that point. He'd stood up for himself. His buddy Mike Cote told me about, a story from when he was young, basically that, they dealt with some racism on the street, and Gino and at school, Gino would stand up for himself. And so this is a guy who knew how to take care of himself. It wasn't his instinct, but he became a junior hockey tough guy. And he spent a season doing it with Hawkesbury, which was a sort of a junior A team. And along the way, Hartley basically says, listen, if you keep up with this role, I will help you get to major junior next year. And obviously this is the time of the heavyweight and all that kind of stuff. And he ends up in Laval, and there's lots of that. I mean, the story, the Gino, the sort of hockey career was so well known, but how he got to be the guy that he was important, I think, for us to tell. And, that was a lot on me. Just, I ended up getting a hold of Paulin Bordelot, who was his first coach in Laval, and a bit of an under-discussed story in the history of Quebec hockey. About former Vancouver Canuck, by the way. And just doing that, and then talking about the challenges in his life, how he became, a mentor to a lot of Indigenous youth. And as I said, there was sort of some struggles with alcohol. We talked about his journey for healing, he called it, in the summer of 1995, when he and Sandy McCarthy ran and walked from Calgary to Vancouver. I talked to Sandy about that. I talked to Jen Thomas, the leader of Slay-La-Tooth, or former chief of Slay-La-Tooth, who was involved in organizing that. And Gino meant a lot to a lot of people. And the task of the book was to try to raise them up. And the story, as I said, when you're young, they always say, no, don't meet your heroes, right? You're only bound to be disappointed. And Gino, Gino was certainly someone that, I appreciated playing for the Canucks when I was young. And certainly someone I, growing up in Dunbar, with someone I'd see around the neighborhood. But, to learn about him and his sort of, his life, it was really interesting, and he was someone that people cared deeply about. He cared deeply about the people around him, and he did, for better, for all his best efforts, he really did try to make the lives of people around him, and he helped young people, and he, whether it was in the workshops that he and Peter led, or just in his interactions with young people, whether it was back in his community or here. They spoke with a young guy named Stefan Friday, who runs a website called Hockey Indigenous. He's sort of tracking the legacy of Indigenous hockey players in the NHL. And Stefan's talked about, he's from a place called Saskatchewan, which is on the coast of Hudson's Bay, way up northern Ontario. There's no road in. There's a lot of sort of social problems there. And Gino and old sort of a former NHLer who's also from the community, from Gino's community, called Jean Chabot, who played in the NHL, and then Jonathan Chichu before he actually became an NHLer, but he'd become quite a prominent junior player. The three of them came and put on a little sort of hockey clinic, and Stefan, it stuck with Stefan all his life, and now he's he's become a bit of a leader, Indigenous leader in his own right. There's all these stories out there, and that's some of the things we touched on, and we touched on Gino's sort of parent, life as a parent. And I spoke with, a couple of his sons and a couple of the mums is the best way to put it, and learned a lot about who he was as a father and how he did his best. And in the end, inevitably, some of the things where he came up short, but it was a really fascinating story. Gino's treatment, he had a genetic heart condition in the end that he basically underwent chemo. It's not cancer, but he underwent chemotherapy for it. So he talked to a couple of his doctors there, and he didn't, the treatment that he used on him wasn't groundbreaking, but he certainly was a proving ground for a treatment that was still pretty new at the time. And there's patients now, like his doctor says, there's patients now that benefit from what they learned from Gino. And yeah, talking about the legacy of his life, and in the end, Peter and I decided. Peter was there at the end of Gino's life, and Peter and I decided that it was something that we wanted to tell, and Gino wasn't. I mean, undercurrent of the story, and I suppose if I was able to get a chance to sort of do it again, there's another way to go at this. When you talk about Gino, and he couldn't be alone, and Gino's sort of need for companionship, whether that was sort of from a sort of in a loving aspect or just in a friendship aspect. And a real undercurrent to the story was Gino's sort of desire to be with other people. And even at the end of his life, he was with someone that cared about him. And it was a fascinating. I'm proud of the work that Peter and I have done, and then the book Peter and I have put together.
You should be, and people should go pick it up. And, whether it's for yourself, you're a Canuck fan, or a Canuck fan, it is a great Christmas present. We'll be running an excerpt on our website coming up soon. But check out all of Patrick's writing, theprovince.com, vancouversun.com. Sign up for our newsletters, register. You'll get all this great stuff. Went a bit long today, but well worth it. And looking forward to reading the whole book all the way to the end. So thank you, Patrick. Thanks, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll talk to you next week.